1923 Season 2. Spencer is about to make up for missing out on the Dutton family's 1883 journey. In 1923 Season 2, Spencer Dutton, Brandon Sklenar, will make up for missing his family's journey in 1883. Taylor Sheridan's Yellowstone prequel is off to an ominous start in the 1923 Season 2 premiere, with Spencer literally fighting his way back to Montana on an Italian freighter as danger arrives at the Duttons' doorstep back at home in Paradise Valley. The World War I veteran was off hunting big game in Africa until he met his wife, Alexandra Julia Schlepfer, who convinced him to read his backlog of letters from his Aunt Cara, Helen Mirren. When Spencer gets word that the fate of the Yellowstone Dutton Ranch is in peril, he begins the long journey home to Montana. While Spencer and his new wife are initially on a British liner in 1923 Season 1, Episode 8, Nothing Left to Lose, heading for London, Spencer is forced to take a detour after being removed from the King's ship. Alex and Spencer are separated after Dutton throws Arthur, Rafe Sewell, Alexa's former fiancé and the Earl of Sussex, off the ship's side. 1923 Season 2 reveals that Alex will leave for Montana as Spencer arrives in Galveston, Texas. Before 1923, Yellowstone co-creator Taylor Sheridan wrote 1883, the first prequel about the Dutton family. 1883 introduced the earliest known members of the Dutton family tree: James Tim McGraw and Margaret Dutton, Faith Hill, and their children Elsa, Isabel May, and John Audie Rick, traversed a northwest variant of the Oregon Trail from Texas to Montana. While the family initially planned to follow the patriarch stream to the Willamette Valley in Oregon, tragedy cut their journey short, and the Duttons took a detour to Paradise Valley. There, James and Margaret established a new life. 1883 follows James and Margaret's family as their daughter, Elsa, narrates the epic journey. As an 18-year-old having a coming-of-age experience on the Oregon Trail, Elsa's insights are as profound and insightful as they are naive. Elsa has an intuitive connection to the wilderness. She explores it as her family forges rivers in Texas and dodges tornadoes and bandits on the Great Plains in their prairie wagon. The Dutton family's journey ends with Elsa's death in 1883, which is the result of a heartbreaking misunderstanding that paints the misfortunes of westward expansion and settler colonialism in the American West. Despite Spencer being James and Margaret Dutton's child, he didn't attend his family's journey along the Oregon Trail. That said, there's a simple explanation for why Margaret's youngest child didn't join the family's journey. Spencer Dutton was born after 1883's ending, after the family settled in Paradise Valley, Montana. Yellowstone first introduces Spencer in a flashback in Yellowstone Season 4, showing James with his sons on the ranch. They ride down to a group of Crow people who ask to bury their dead on their former land. Charlie Stover appears again as young Spencer in Yellowstone Season 4, Episode 8. It's hard to say whether Margaret planned to have another child. The Dutton matriarch could have planned to have more children when the family settled in their new home. That said, it could also be that the tragedy of Elsa's death along the Oregon Trail inspired Margaret to expand her family in Paradise Valley. Since Spencer was born after the family completed their journey, he never met his sister, Elsa, who defined the Dutton family story in 1883. While Spencer isn't present in the titular year to witness his family's Montana origins, Yellowstone flashbacks set up Spencer's story for 1923. In 1883, James guided his family from Fort Worth to the Paradise Valley after they arrived in Texas from Tennessee. James traveled with his family from Texas to Montana as 1883 progressed. Spencer is about to recreate his family's journey in 1923 Season 2. At the end of 1923 Season 2's premiere, Spencer's ship arrives at the port in Galveston, Texas, where he will continue his journey north to the mountains. Therefore, Spencer will make a northwest journey from Texas to Montana in 1923, roughly the same one his family made 40 years ago. Still, Spencer's trip will look different from his family's experience. James and Margaret Dutton traveled from Texas to Montana in a green-covered wagon and on horseback, traveling without modern means. In 1883, a train line was completed from Galveston, Texas, to California, comprising the Second Transcontinental Railway and making the territories more accessible. 1883 talked about the last of the Oregon Trail because they were putting in a railroad. And Spencer's journey in 1923 can highlight how much has changed outside Montana, with Dutton potentially taking the train. Spencer Dutton had spent his life running from the past, from grief, from his own name. But the war had changed him, and Africa had hardened him. Now, as he sat atop his horse, staring at the land his family had fought for, he realized something. He had been absent for too long. The echoes of 1883 were still buried in the Montana soil, whispers of the past carried by the wind that whipped through the valley. His parents, James and Margaret, had forged the path west through sacrifice and blood, and his uncle Jacob had taken up the burden when fate had stolen them away. Spencer had never been a part of it. He had been too young to understand the trials of his family's journey across the Great Plains, too naive to grasp the weight of their struggle. And when the war called him away, he had done what Dutton men had always done, fought. But in fighting battles on foreign soil, he had abandoned the one that truly mattered. That was about to change. The ghosts of 1883. Spencer was finally home, but the home he had left behind was no longer the same. The Yellowstone was under siege, both by men with legal papers and those with bullets. He had returned just in time to see his brother John, buried beneath that same Montana earth their ancestors had spilled blood over. The war had followed him back to America, just with different enemies. Yet something deeper gnawed at him. For years, he had heard stories of what his family endured in 1883, the endless miles of dust and death, the river crossings that stole lives, the bitter cold that had tested them beyond reason. His mother, Margaret, had spoken of it only in hushed whispers before she died, her eyes haunted by memories of loss. Elsa's name was never spoken without pain, her fatal wound that had never fully healed. And James. Spencer had no true memories of his father, only the vague recollections of a man who had died with a gun in his hands, trying to protect what little they had left. Spencer had never shared in their suffering, never earned the right to stand among them as an equal. But now, as he looked out across the land they had claimed, he understood something for the first time. His fight had only just begun. A journey to prove himself. Jacob Dutton had always been a hard man, but Spencer could see something different in his uncle's eyes now. Weariness. The weight of too many battles, too many losses. "You should have been here," Jacob had said, not in anger, but in truth. Spencer had no answer. He could only nod. What good was regret? What mattered now was action. And so, when word came that the land was once again at risk, Spencer did what his father and grandfather had done before him. He saddled his horse and prepared for war. But this war would be different. In 1883, the Duttons had been strangers in a foreign land, fighting the elements, disease, and the merciless hands of fate. Now, in 1923, their enemies had faces. Men in suits who wanted to take their land with signatures, and men with rifles who would take it by force. But Spencer had learned long ago that the most dangerous threats weren't always the ones who announced themselves. And so he prepared for a different kind of journey, retracing his family's footsteps. Before he could fight for his family's future, Spencer needed to understand its past. The journey west had not been a mere migration. It had been a crucible, a test of will that had forged the Dutton name in blood and sweat. Spencer needed to feel that pain. And so he set out, not just across the Yellowstone, but beyond. He traveled the old trails where his father had walked, traced the route his family had taken in 1883. He rode alone, save for the memories that clung to the land like ghosts. He crossed rivers that had once drowned wagons, stood upon ridges where his ancestors had stared down death itself. He walked where Elsa had fallen, where James had made his final stand, where his mother had wept for all they had lost. And for the first time in his life, he felt the weight of it all. He had spent years hunting beasts in Africa, believing himself a predator among prey. But here on this land, he was the hunted. The past chased him like a shadow, demanding atonement. Spencer's reckoning, when he returned to the Yellowstone, something in him had changed. He no longer carried the burdens of a man who had abandoned his home. He carried the strength of those who had come before him. "You finally understand, don't you?" Kara Dutton asked, her voice softer than he had ever heard. Spencer nodded. He had spent his life believing that being a Dutton meant fighting, but he had been wrong. It wasn't about war. It was about survival. It was about sacrifice.